Hi, everyone. This is Little Red Book. Just a heads up, there are some significant spoilers in this episode. They are all prefaced by us saying spoilers. If you have not read The Magicians by Lev Grossman, skip ahead a minute and a half after the spoiler warning is called. If you haven't read Thomas Covenant by Stephen Donaldson, skip ahead 30 seconds. There are other minor spoilers, but these are major. Yeti, Era, and I had a ton of fun, and we hope you enjoyed this episode.
Welcome, everybody, to the Green Team Legendarium Pod. I would talk about how awesome Little Red Book is, but I don't want her to blush. So today we are talking about trilogies and our Mount Rushmores. And to my figurative left, I do have Little Red Book.
Hello, everyone.
And my figurative right, I have Eradandis.
Hey, guys.
And so quickly, Mount Rushmore of Trilogies. That sounds ridiculous, I know. Essentially, it's just a top four in any meaningful metric. Our panelists can what's most impactful, what their favorites are, most well-written, but there's no real order, just like on the Mount Rushmore, those presidents aren't in order from 1 to 4. It's just 4 impactful presidents, and these are 4 impactful trilogies. And I guess I'll start. Oh, and I will say, so we did not put Lord of the Rings on here in any of our Mount Rushmores, not because we want to make Craig of the Red Team viciously angry at us, but because it's such an iconic series and it's to make for a better podcast, I think it would be in all of our top 4s. So we kind of excluded that and put it in its own pedestal of glory, and hopefully that wins brownie points for Craig. By Craig, and but first, before we get into our picks, I'll throw it to Era first, but I want to say, what draws you to trilogies, and are you drawn to trilogies, and especially in the fantasy genre, because it looks like that's what our lists are made up of most.
So sure, yeah, I would say, well, first, trilogies kind of came from Lord of the Rings. It was originally intended as 1 book. The publishers made it into 3. And then from then, when they saw its success, all successive series started out being trilogies. So when I grew up reading books, it was the Foundation trilogy. It was the Dune trilogy. It was all these trilogies that were all was where I grew up reading. It's where I grew used to, and it's I grew to enjoy that arc. It's the same thing in movies. You would have the beginning movie that sets the tone, the middle arc that's kind of the characters develop, and then the ending story where everything gets tied up. So this is what I grew up with. And then until later, when these trilogies then got expanded and became their own universes. So it's interesting. When I started reading, trilogies were all the rage, and now they're more a rarity than they used to.
All right, I'll kick it to you, Red. What about trilogies do you gravitate towards, and do you? Or are you more of a standalone person yourself?
I got tag teamed into this podcast by accident.
Oh, good. A person who hates trilogies. Perfect.
Yes, that's what I was saying. I was saying I hate trilogies. That is definitely what I meant. No, it's just, it is nice though, because I do read really, really long series sometimes, and it's nice to have something that's short and sweet. And Aaron and I both have talked about just the niceness of having a closed system, as opposed to like with Dresden, where we're all waiting for another book again. And I love Dresden. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying, like, we're still waiting. Or Stormlight. Stormlight's the same way. We're still waiting for another series or another book. I mean,
yeah. I mean, I also think publishing has a thing to do with it too, right? I mean, I think it just became the norm where publishers wanted you to write a trilogy, even if originally it was a 1-book idea. They would have to go. They'd come to them and they say, "Hey, we need 2 more books in this." I know at least one of my series that I picked on here has that problem. Well, not problem, but that was the case for the author. He was like, "Oh, I need 2 more books." But you're right. I mean, it definitely stemmed from Lord of the Rings, and that's kind of what I grew up on. So I thought that was the norm until I heard about Wheel of Time and other big series. I'm like, oh, and I don't know if you guys like one or the other better. I think it's more of a mood thing for me. Sometimes I like the 14-book series of Wheel of Time, the epicness, but also I like a more contained story where, like Era said, there are those just essential story beats where it's a beginning, middle, and end. All right, should we get into our Mount Rushmores and have the outside world critique us?
Let's do
Well,
this.
it's well known I have terrible opinions. It's
Me
okay.
too. All right.
My
First,
opinions are awesome, though.
yeah. No lack of confidence on the spot. I love it. This is fantastic. All right, Era, hit us with your first selection.
Okay. Well, my first selection is The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy trilogy, as told in 5 parts by Douglas Adams. Because what better way to start a list of our top 4 favorite trilogies by picking The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy told in 5 parts? Yes, it's absurdist, and that's the point. That's what the series is about. It's a comedy. And I really just wanted to pick a top 3, and this is really my stand-in for my number 4. The Hitchhiker's Guide follows the adventures of the last human, Arthur Dent, a hapless Englishman, after Earth is destroyed by a bunch of bureaucratic busybody aliens known as the Vogons. Following the destruction of the Earth, Arthur goes on an intergalactic adventure. This is comedy science fiction at its best. Absurdist, heartwarming, it's hilarious, it's just plain fun. It was originally told as a radio series. It became a series of books. It then became a movie, and it's been retold in various ways by Douglas Adams. He keeps on rewriting it, so no 2 stories are ever the same. It's so popular that May 25th is known as Towel Day. So if you ever see somebody walking around with a towel, you know they are a Hitchhiker fan. And I picked 2 of the more famous quotes from Hitchhiker's Guide to kind of give you a flavor. One is a completely inside joke. You've either read the series or you haven't. And the first joke is, "Don't panic." All right. And probably the most famous quote from the series, and probably one of the more famous quotes of all time, at least within the book community, is this: "The answer to the great question of life, the universe, and everything is
42.
said deep thought with infinite majesty and calm." That's my pick, guys.
Oh,
Bravo. Well,
guys, I've only read the series once. It's something I've always meant to revisit. I found out that number 1 son read it all in about a month and a half because he liked it so much. And he's not really a reader either. It's so much fun and it's so funny. And you got to love the titles, like "So Long" and "Thanks for All the Fish." It's great.
I've never read it. But that inside joke, I know, get the shame bell out. I've seen the movie, but that inside joke you talked about, I feel like that goes over as well as, have you read Loch Lamora?
Yes.
I have.
If
The
someone
first
said
2.
"nice bird, a-hole," I feel like that's how I feel right now, except I'm outside of the joke and I don't get it. But it's funny. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's the only sci-fi we have of all our
I
lists.
believe so. Yeah, actually.
It is. And I do want to say I would have picked the Foundation trilogy, or I would have picked the Dune trilogy, but they've since been expanded. And Foundation trilogy is now a 5-book series with additional prequels. And the Dune series also, it originally started off as a trilogy, and now it's a 8 or 9-part series. So some of the books I would have picked, just they no longer fit the exact definition of a trilogy anymore.
Part of the problem, part of the game. Sorry, Era.
Oh, so many problems with me too.
It was harder than I thought. I was talking to you guys. I'm like, man, the 3 were pretty easy. Then that 4th spot, I'm like, I didn't want to put something that's not worthy and get mocked, was actually my biggest problem.
That's probably going to be my first one.
Oh, speaking of which, Red.
So, first of all, I'm intimidated because I did not pull quote from any of my books. But
Shame.
the Collegia Magica by Carol Berg. I haven't met a lot of people that have read her. I recommended another one of her series on the very first episode. But this is basically, it's a political intrigue. It's post a massive war. Somebody turns up dead, and the cousin of the king, who is a librarian at the college, is tapped to figure out who it is. That's the setup. And one of the fun things I like about this series is that the 3 books are told from 3 different characters' perspective, first person, POV. The first book is from the librarian's perspective. The second is from a girl who's brought to court to serve the queen as a handmaiden, and the third is told by a sorcerer. The other two aren't magic wielders. The third one is. So it's just interesting and it's fun. It's a little bit different. And I'm also a big fan of political intrigue. So if you like that sort of thing, plus crazy magic, there you go.
What go ahead, Era.
So my question: so is it the same? Do they tell the same story just from 3 different points of view, or is it the story then it picks up from different points of view along the story?
It's linear. It is told. It's not the same space of time, but the first book is So they take place in linear order, but they're told from different perspectives.
And what
Which
decade?
Is hard.
What decade is this from? Is this recent? Because I've never heard of her, and not that I'm a savant fantasy reader, but
I don't. I'd have to look that up actually. But I want to say it was late 90s, early aughts.
Okay, yeah, so it's before 2000 essentially. Or
I want to say that
early aughts. Sorry, before 2009. There you
go. But it's also it would take place in probably like a Renaissance England, maybe.
Ooh.
Or early Enlightenment England is about. It's not alt history. It's not that close, but that's about like the vibe of the book.
I've recommended this book before, and you also recommended Bujold. I chose Bujold, which you were absolutely correct in recommending. Yeah, she's awesome. So I need to give this one a try. The second time you recommend.
Yeah, I recommended it at the end of Curse of Chalion, I think, episode.
In red we trust. I know.
Sure. I have a lot of bad taste, guys.
No. How dare you?
Did you hear the romance?
I did not yet. I can't wait to. Is that posted? The romance?
It is. It's posted. The romance episodes are posted.
Oh
no, wait, no, it's not.
It's
I lied.
Not. Okay, because I would have been on that like white on rice. All right,
Yeti. Cheers.
My next so my first pick, and yes, I am Yeti, by the way. I didn't introduce myself. Yettibeats on the Discord. And this might be a double feature going into eras, but I picked Tawny Man by Robin Hobb. And to be honest, I had a tough time going back and forth between this and Live Ship. If you see me on the Discord, I usually only chime in to talk about Live Ship with occasional Joe Abercrombie. But the deciding factor for me, for those who have read it, is mostly Fitz and where he is at this stage in his life. I found it immensely relatable and not super depressing way. But I felt like this story dealt with change and being forced change. If you haven't read it, it picks up where Fitz leaves off, I guess, after the end of Farseer, about 15 years later, and he's kind of secluded himself from his buckkeep and his life that he's known. And it goes from there and hijinks ensue. But just the idea that an era, maybe you can agree or disagree, but to me, the whole story, the whole trilogy, based on this one fact that change is going to happen whether you like it or not. Life will force change upon you. I feel like Fitz has been told that by numerous characters in this series, and the way he reacts to it or kind of pushes against it is just, I found it incredibly readable because I've been there, and there's times where you don't want to change as a person or this or that, but loss will happen, whether it's mortality, a loss of a relationship, just to change people in your lives appear that you don't expect, and you it's it's just powerful. It really was. And I love the Live Ship traders and the bunch of different characters' perspectives that you meet. But ultimately for me, it was where Fitz is at his life. And I always love I don't know about you guys, but a good 10 years later story or X amount of years later, we're like, oh, we're back with this. But I know Era likes this book too.
I agree with you. I think you're now so raw, especially with Tawny Man. That's really the going theme of the book. And I feel like we could have picked any trilogy of Robin Hobb and kind of, had this discussion. So it's really more to taste. What I would say to a new reader who was getting in, hey, I want to read some of Robin Hobb's books. I very well might recommend the first book, was it Fool's Errand, from the Tawny Man trilogy first. You don't need to read the first series. Fool's Fate. I'm sorry. You don't need to read the Farseer trilogy to read this. You don't really need it. It's good. It's a good prequel, but you don't need it. And the reason I would recommend it is, out of all of the Fitz books, this one is the most action-oriented of the six. What do you think?
Me?
Either one of you.
I mean, I've started Tawny Man. I don't know why I didn't finish it. I have read the first trilogy, but
Yeah.
I mean, Robin Hobb is somebody who I've read 2 of her series completely through, and she's fine. Like, she's a good writer, and there's just other things I'd rather read.
Yeah, no,
It's just a taste thing.
First of all, you were right, Era. What it is, Fool's Errand, Fool's Fate's the third one. But yeah, Hobbs, like there's gonna be a couple series, probably almost all of my series, where I don't fault people for not loving the authors I choose. But I just think if, at least with this trilogy and the one Era's going to talk about, I think it all depends if you connect with Fitz. I mean, if you can't really stand him, or you get aggravated on, I guess you can say, the decisions he's made, I don't think it's going to work.
I wouldn't say he aggravated me. The other series I read of hers, the main character absolutely did. No, it's just more that there's other things I want to read.
Yeah, no,
that's mainly what it is.
I will admit to some bias. I've loved her since she originally wrote under her original name, Megan Lindholm. And so she co-authored a book with Stephen Bruss called Gypsy, which is just a phenomenal standalone book that you have to read it. That's all I'm going to say. It's Hungarian folktale kind of mixed into modern urban fantasy. And you can tell what part is Bruss and what part is Lindholm, because when you get to the character interactions, it's all Lindholm, and the setting and the vibe of the story is all Bruss, and it's great. It's great. It really is. And so I've been a fan of hers for a long time. And when I originally read the Farseer trilogy, I had no idea that Megan Lindholm's pen name was Robin Hobb. And I'm like, wow, this author's a whole lot like Megan Lindholm. What the hell? And then I looked it up and I'm like, oh, okay. So anyway.
Yeah, I'm a big believer when it comes to reading and also movie watching and a lot of things, that you kind of have to be in the mood. If I'm not in the mood for a certain type of book, I'm not going to get as much enjoyment of it. With Hobb, I think her relationship work, people say she's great at characters, and she is. I mean, Fitz, debatable, but I think the relationships she writes between characters it's phenomenal. It makes there's this trilogy, I think the second book, very little happens. It's a bridge book. You're in one location, and it's just characters from past, future, all mingling from Fitz's future, past and stuff, or new characters, old characters, and that's all it is. Just him interacting with all these different characters in different scenarios, and it's incredible.
If I knew Fitz in real life,
oh god,
I was trying to think of a good way to describe the feelings about the character. Because I don't it's my personal opinion, you do not need to like the protagonist to enjoy the story.
That'll come up again.
With Fitz, hold that thought. So with Fitz, I feel like I wouldn't like him, but I would love him. Yeah. He's somebody I would want to love and protect, but I don't like him on a day-to-day basis. Does that make sense?
Yeah. He's not a good hang.
No, he is not a good hang.
Well, do you want to segue into your pick then, Era?
Sure. So I picked the first one, Farseer Trilogy. And I've been trying to find a way to describe just the first trilogy. And the reason I was trying to find a way to describe it is because they're all called Assassin's Apprentice, Royal Assassin. So people go in expecting one thing with that title, Assassin, but they end up getting something completely different, like assassins. So here is what I've come up with. Take the TV show Game of Thrones. Magic, dragons, assassins, political intrigue. You're going to follow the story of one of the greatest fighters of a country named Buck, and that character is known as Fitz. He's an assassin and a warrior. He has a wolf companion. He knows both the outlawed magic and the accepted kind of magic. He's known to be utterly loyal and ruthless in service to his king. He is one of the finest warriors this country has ever produced. Now, with that in mind, we're going to explore the story of Fitz and the people around him like the TV show Mad Men. You won't directly see most of what I just described. Instead, what you're going to see is the story of Fitz as he sees himself and how others around him see him. We're going to get a detailed character portrayal telling you about the moments that made the man Fitz. For all his talent, he's still a young man trying to figure the world out. And what makes him interesting to other people, his job, is not something that he's actually interested in. So all the action comes from the interaction between the characters. In my opinion, at least I know I have, everyone's going to meet a Fitz at some point in their life. someone with all the talent in the world, but they've been damaged in some way, and they're now racked with doubt and depression and self-pity. It's one of the finest explorations of the human condition I've read in fantasy that's all been packed into one trilogy. I've talked about Fitz this whole time, but you can apply anything I've said to any of the other characters. Burrick, Chade, Fool. I could pick any one of a number of great quotes, but I wanted to pick a couple just to give you a sense of what the book is about. So this is one where one of Fitz's father figures is speaking to Fitz, and Fitz's kind of response in his head. Quote, "I thought we had lost you. I thought we'd done something worse than let you die." His old arms were tight and strong about me. I was kind to the old man. I did not tell them that they had. Then one more. This is Fitz. This will let you know kind of his personality issues. He's talking to his mentor, Chade. "Chade, I know the fool is strange, but I like it when he comes to talk to me. He speaks in riddles, and he insults me and makes fun of me and gives himself leave to tell me things he thinks I should do, like wash my hair or not wear yellow. But I like him. He mocks me, but from him it seems a kindness. He makes me feel, well, important, that he could choose me to talk to. That's why I like Farseer Trilogy."
Listen,
What do you guys think?
you already won me over when you compared Mad Men and Game of Thrones. I mean, I'm looking at the box set of Mad Men right here. It's
There you go.
Yeah,
I have not seen Mad Men. Sorry.
Read
And
it.
I've only gotten part way through Game of Thrones.
I'll ship Mad Men to you. Don't worry.
Don't do that. That's not necessary. It's not necessary. Thank you.
I watched Mad Men with my wife. So the first, was it season, 2 seasons? For me, pure torture. But then after that was done, you kind of got into more about the characters and how they interacted with each other. And their job, they worked at an ad agency, was kind of beside the point. It was all about who they are as human beings and what they are. And the reason I thought of Mad Men is the main character, Mad Men, is not a likable person. He's charming, but he's not likable. And that describes Fitz pretty well.
Yeah, and same thing.
I don't think he's charming.
Don Draper.
Fitz.
Oh.
I don't think Fitz is charming.
Because you're seeing it from his perspective. Everybody around him, they adore him. Have you not? I mean, if he was not charming, Burke wouldn't want to protect him. Chade wouldn't want to protect him. The Fool wouldn't want to protect him. He wouldn't have girls falling all over him. I mean, he doesn't see this because to him, he's a schlub.
Well,
he doesn't think he's anything. I mean, for example, in the books, when they briefly describe a fight scene, he talks about fighting people, like chopping wood. He just doesn't think that's important. Everybody else thinks it is. He doesn't. What he cares about is his girlfriend. What he cares about is his night eyes. Those are the things he cares about, and that's what he wants to talk about.
And something I don't know how many people can relate to, but I'm sure a ton, is that feeling of self-loathing comes from where he came from. I mean, he's the B word, where he was tossed aside by his father and his mother, which, yeah, I don't want to curse on this past case.
I don't think in this particular case it would be a curse, but okay.
No, but you know what I'm saying. And and so
his parents were not married folks.
Right. And it's funny that you brought up Don Draper, because it's similar. I mean, he's the son of a prostitute. So I mean, that self-loathing comes from, he never thought they should be here or they were ever wanted, as children.
Well, and also the fact that he has this connection to animals, which is a forbidden magic. And so he has a lot of self-loathing that is put on him.
Yeah, by Burke. The
Who
dynamics are.
Is it, by the way?
I know. And I think what I wanted to point out, what Era brought up, these are broken characters. I mean, that's what I relate to, because I think everyone, is never perfect, maybe not broken, but you can relate to broken characters like that, even if they can be tough reads or terrible hangs, But
they're humans doing heroic things. There's one hero as far as I'm concerned in the story. That's Verity. Spoiler: Verity, I think, is the hero. He's the best, but even he's broken, right? And he really, I mean, he only gets through it because of this guy that at least to him, he's literally a nobody. And the reason Verity is able to succeed at the end is because of Fitz. So anyways, I love it. It's human, real human beings. At least that's how it's portrayed, being put into a fantasy setting in a heroic, forced to be heroes. So
what I will say about the first book that makes it kind of tough is that it starts off and Fitz is very young. And so the first book, you feel like the world is acting on him because it is, because he's too young to have agency. And so that's something that really turns people off. It did not turn me off. I enjoyed the books, but just a heads up, that's what people complain about.
Yeah, it took me over halfway to be completely sold on it. You're right. The beginning, I don't know. It was hard to grapple with Fitz for a little bit as a character because, like you said, he's so young. But at the halfway point, a little bit, I was like, I see what kind of book this is and what she's going for.
I just want to add, I don't think it's a bad book. It's just like she's not a go-to author for me. That's all.
No, well, I mean, like what I would say is, in response to that is, if you want a super heroic, super intelligent 9-year-old, go read Orson Scott Card. I mean, Robin Hobb's could write a 9-year-old like a 9-year-old.
Yep.
I mean, and if that's not your thing, then it's not your thing. But it is mine. I like it. I like an author who can describe people believably.
All right, enough Hobb, or else they'll boycott this podcast.
Yes, they will.
All right, Red, go to your pick. I love this one.
Okay, so I picked The Magicians by Lev Grossman. This is very easy to describe. It's Harry Potter and Narnia smashed together and made super adult. It's very dark, and the main character isn't terribly likable, but it's just fun to have. It's this great parody that also, explores like how magicians might actually operate if they were in the real world, kind of, because that's a spoiler. I can't say that.
We'll spoiler
what?
Comment. We'll put spoilers in the comments when we post it.
Okay. Well, so like when they graduate from their magical school, they basically get all this money and then they don't have anything to do, and they just turn into these, like, they throw parties and they're just super depressed. But it's really cool because they go to Narnia from their magic school, which everybody said didn't actually exist. And then the Aslan characters die in a horrible murder. And it's just fun.
Yeah.
It's not fun like yay fun. It's fun like
it's a fun take on it. And I love the way that it deals with expectations. It's so applicable to life, even though it's talking about Narnia. But, those characters get there, and at first they're jubilant and they can't believe this thing is real, and it's just totally not what they expect, and their life is not what they expect. They don't feel fulfilled or where they're at just because they're at this magical place. And that, when I first read that, I was in my early 20s, and I was kind of, I don't know, I'm sure other media has done that, but I was just like, oh my God. I thought, again, I thought this was going to be like them in Narnia, but as adults. I'm like, what? And then it was just a totally different thing. So.
And there's this aspect of, so like when you graduate from college or high school, like all of a sudden you're going to have everything figured out. And really nobody has anything figured out still.
Sure. Yeah.
Which is, I mean, adulting is not great.
Oh, right. Have you read this, Sarah?
I've read the first book, and what I'm sitting here thinking as you guys are talking is that it's really interesting how tastes affect people, because Quentin is a talented, depressed individual, but Red likes this series and is indifferent to the Farseer trilogy, and they're essentially the same kind of character, talented, depressed people.
Not
so, I'm not trying to put down the Magicians.
No.
I like the first book. I didn't love it, right? But I mean, I know so many people who like it, and it's like it probably caught me on the wrong side of my 20s, right? So
right.
I don't think I was the right age for it. But everybody I've talked to, you guys, everybody else on Discord who's read it, like they don't like it, they love it. Like they adore this series. So
I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that I grew up on Narnia. Like they are literally the books I've read the most. And I mean, I've only read Harry Potter once, but I was 19 when I started reading it. There were several books out when I started reading it. And then I picked up the Magicians right when it first came out. So that would probably, I'm going to say I was younger than 25. I don't remember exactly what year it came out. And my life had kind of done the same thing, because all of a sudden I was married and 2 kids at 25, which was not something I had ever planned. And it was just, and I was a super driven student. So I I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this. And then I graduated from college, and nothing I expected to happen happened. And so it probably hit me like at the perfect time.
Yeah. And I related to that, and I related to things that I did achieve that I always planned on, and it didn't fulfill me like I thought it would. And I felt like that's how it felt for Quentin. And it's just like, man, that's just when you hit that feeling, you're like, kind of, I don't want to go on a tangent, but it's kind of like the movie Soul, if you've ever seen that. It deals with the same thing, that once you reach this stage of something, it's not, what do you do when you don't get that fulfilling feeling, of what you initially thought it would be. And
Right.
that like really turned my brain upside down when I read that.
And I don't want you guys to get the idea that I didn't find being married with children not fulfilling. That's not what I meant. I never expected to get married or have kids.
Right. Yeah. No,
And my
totally
life just derailed. So,
yeah.
or at least not get married until I was well into my 30s.
Sometimes cliches are cliches for a reason. How many times have you heard? I know I've heard it a lot. It's the journey, not the destination.
Right.
So
yeah.
And it also deals with, not real spoilers a little bit, but with death, dealing with death. I remember there was a death in that book that Quentin dealt with that like hit me like a ton of bricks. The way the author described it and his emotions, and I wish I had that passage with me, but it's really powerful. And I just think he's a good writer. I actually think this series is really divisive. I think you either love it, like you said, Era, or you hate it. If this one isn't for you, I think people don't. They're really harsh on it. That's what I've found. I've never found someone middling, to be honest with you, except for you, Era. You're the first.
Well, look, I mean,
well, I feel like I'm in the same place with the Farseer series. Like everybody loves it or hate it. I'm like, I'm glad I read it.
Yeah. I mean, I think they're both important series in the genre. I really do. Whether you like them or hate them, I think they're important. All right.
what's yours?
Oh yeah, I'm up next. So this one is called The Defined Cities by Robert Jackson Bennett. If you know the IOL podcast with Drew and Rob, they are reading it. I like to brag that I pushed them into reading it. No big deal. But this is kind of like an urban fantasy that's, it deals a lot with, the biggest thing I liked about this is it deals with history and, the world building in this with a lot of social things, societal things going on. And just on a surface level, this series, what really stood out to me, and I'm probably not as well read as Era and Red, but to have a main protagonist that's middle-aged woman who's a history buff.
Shut up. Era's pointing at me.
Well, I mean, I hadn't read a fantasy like that. To have that's your protagonist is someone who, what they do is history. I mean, it is, there's a lot of, she's solving a mystery, so to speak, but it's not this, it's not violence. That's not, she's not physical or anything. She uses kind of her calm, I wouldn't even say smarts. She's just her knowledge of history to figure things out. And that, really drew me in, to be quite honest with you, amongst other things. Kind of what Red said, this series, spoilers, I guess, kind of, if you're reading it, follows a different
not too many spoilers. I just
sorry.
Okay.
I was just going to say, this sounds like a book that was written for me. It really does.
Don't spoil it too much.
No, it's political. It's fantastic. But there's other characters involved that are kind of the same. I mean, you have an army general who I know Drew isn't a big fan of, or is a little cliche, but she's an army general who kind of has, kind of the rough and ragged, curses at people. But the PTSD she deals with in a book, what it deals with on society levels, he has a great way of. He has a great way of putting things in that are applicable to this world and not being preachy, if that makes sense. Political, religious, and it never comes off as like he's preaching his political views. It naturally seems into the world that he created and the characters that he's used. And this series is so criminally underrated. I know his Foundry Side series is getting more buzz because it's newer and I think a little more accessible to readers. Kind of has more of a magic system compared to Brandon Sanderson, and it's good. But I really think this is, when I thought about it, it's one of the 4 best trilogies I've ever read. I love it.
So I guess just to clarify, Foundry Side is after the Divine.
Different world, different series, but it's after. He wrote it after, yes.
He wrote it after, okay. So the reason I was pointing at Red before wasn't to cast aspersions on her. It was because a book that she's going to talk about later, it involves a middle-aged person kind of going through some things, and honestly, it was probably one of the favorite books I've read in the last couple of years. It's really great. And I don't want to say anything more about it because you're going to talk about it later.
But I am a history buff who is also middle-aged.
Yeah. So I've read kind of like the first half of the first book. I guess just to piggyback on what you're saying, Robert Jackson Bennett has a way with world building that I'm really, really enjoying. The characters so far, they're fine. I mean, I'm not like in love with them, but I am in love with the way he's crafting his world. He'll put in a sentence here, a sentence there, and each one builds on the last. Or he shows a lot, he doesn't tell. So, you get this impression that there's the dominant culture is like this Indian-esque culture, and oppressed culture is this Russian-esque culture. And that's just to give you some flavor. It's not like it's a one-to-one comparison. From what little I've read, I haven't read the whole series. It's really good so far.
And it's, again, I didn't plan this, but it deals with this theme of change in this series, that if you ever want to make, people who try or attempt to make monumental societal change, society will push back. You'll see it throughout the books that it does not happen quick. You're always going to get pushback from good and evil, good or bad forces, but the fact you have people in this series trying to change the way things are, and I love how he says that, in other fantasy books, over the course of one book or a trilogy, maybe, that this grand change to society, the Dark Lord's finished or whatever, and this sweeping change happens immediately, and he's like, no, that's not realistic. That doesn't have it. Unfortunately, sometimes the characters who attempt the change, it could be a stepping stone, but they don't know, they probably won't be around to, or not that they're not around, but it's not an immediate effect for them to see their change. And I love that. Again, my biggest thing is what the stuff he puts in is real world applications, and it isn't preachy, which I appreciate.
Yeah, that's always a fine balance. There's some authors that do it well.
Yeah.
Era and I are reading Brightness Reef right now, and David Byrne is really good at not being preachy, but still exposing you to a whole bunch of ideas and philosophies and whatnot.
And Bennett, if you go on his Twitter, he is preachy, and he doesn't care. It's with a sense of vitriol of where we are today, but he doesn't let that really slip too much, I think, into his writing.
There's a reason why I don't follow authors on Twitter, because I just don't want to know.
All right. Well, Era, you're speaking my language with this next pick. So,
well, this next pick was recommended by Yettibeats.
No, stop, please.
So the book is the series is called Lowtown by Daniel Polanski. Yettibeats recommended it to me. He'd read I think The Builders duology, and it said, you have got to read this. So anyway, so I read it, Lowtown, then I read Tomorrow the Killing and She Who Waits. And Daniel Polanski, just on his writing ability, has become one of my favorite new authors. In this series, he's created a true anti-hero character by the name of Warden, and he created a fantasy trilogy around him. The premise is Warden was a former soldier and police officer who became the gangster kingpin of Lowtown. He's a drug-addicted, cynical, violent man. There's one thing he can't abide, and that's killing children. The trilogy starts when he finds the abused corpse of a young girl. Warden is one of the most fascinating protagonists I've read, probably in the last decade. He is a legitimately bad person who used to be one of the best. He is a real anti-hero. He is a drug dealer. He is a drug addict. He does murder people. He is a hard-bitten man who has had his ideals stripped away. Getting to see how low he is, and that is what makes his journey towards his redemption so interesting. But it's not just Warden. Even though it kind of started off a little bit two-dimensional, he created a bunch of really interesting side characters around him to bounce off of Warden. There's Adolphus, his innkeeper friend who knew him before he became what he is. There's Ren, a street urchin who Warden adopts. And then there are all these antagonists who I really just don't want to say anything about. You should read the books to see more about them. Now, I know what I'm saying may make this sound like typical grimdark fare. What sets it apart for me is Polanski's prose. It's very direct, engaging, and evocative. It's got this, at least to me, this plain-spoken feel to it. So I'll pick two quotes that kind of show his writing style, at least to me, what attracted me to it. The first one is from book 2. Quote, "It's a dangerous thing, pretense. A man ought to know who he is, even if he isn't proud to be it." It's pretty good. From book 1, "Up close, she looked like someone better seen from farther away." Again, there's just that humor to it. So anyways, I like the way Polanski writes. It's grimdark, so grimdark's not your thing. You're probably not going to like it. But he has a really engaging writing style, which really, really sucked me in.
I adore Daniel Polanski. It's no secret that my favorite part of him, he is so well read in every type of genre. If you follow his Goodreads, he'll read a mystery novel from 1965. He'll read a history book about ancient, some point in ancient Greece in the 1500s. I'm making that up. You know what I mean? He'll read a new fantasy book from 2021, and then he'll read a romance book from 1972 about Swedish lesbians. I'm not joking. And it comes out in his writings. Just there's a reason why this trilogy, The Lowtown, is, I think, the best noir fantasy out there, and I think that's probably going to be arguable. I think I haven't read I haven't read enough noir fantasy to say that, but it's incredible. And you're right, the Warden is the peak of his writing. That character is so well written. It could come off one note as a worse writer, and it's fantastic. And he kind of mimics that character in The Builders with the main character in The Builders. It's kind of a Warden knockoff as a mouse, but I love Daniel Plansky. He's the best.
So I have not. So you say grimdark era, and Yeti says noir, and to me, those are two different things.
It's like it legitimately is like a grimdark noir, I guess, in the story way. In the story, it's a noir, I would say, because he's kind of just trying to solve a mystery in a city.
I refuse to get into another battle of grimdark definitions. Let's call it noir and leave it at that. Okay?
Well, we don't have Yasna here anyway, so
I think it is a little bit of both, generally.
What I would say is that my description may come across as a little bit of, oh, wow, that sounds like any one of 100 other books, you can pick up that has the same basic premise. The point of it is basically the stories come in two categories. You have a great idea and you're a so-so writer, or you're a great writer and the idea is If you're lucky, you could do both. This idea has been done before. It's been done in various ways, but Polanski can write like nobody's business. He's not a good writer. He is a great writer. And so he could probably write the telephone book and I'd read him. I mean, he's just got a really, really good way to write. He's got a really, really engaging writing style, at least for me.
Yeah, it's a crime mystery thriller in a fantastical world.
Okay.
But yeah,
that sounds like something I might try. I tend to like mysteries and magic, and so
you would like it for that.
Probably, yeah.
But there's bad things happen to people.
Bad things happen to people in all of our books.
Amen. We do have a really depressing list as far as anti-heroes, and I love it. But Red, you're going to save us with this next one. There's nothing depressing about it.
Mistborn is pretty depressing. What are you talking about? Would you want to live in that world?
No, I despise that world.
And I'm going to make all the Brandon Sanderson fans mad because I'm only going to talk off the top of my head. I don't have a prepared statement.
No, that's fine. We can't hang with them.
No.
Okay, moving on. Now that we're done with Mistborn.
So shut up. So Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson is the first trilogy I'm pretty sure it was the first published trilogy in the whole Cosmere, wasn't it?
Yep.
And follows Ven and Kelsier. Ven is a street rat. She's who works for this guy that runs cons. They run the wrong con at the beginning of the book. And she's saved by Kelsier, who is a good con man. And he's got the biggest con that's ever going to be run, ever. And they have cool magic. It's my favorite magic system, is Allomancy is. The books are really nice because there's three main types of magic in the series, and each book focuses on one type of magic. And so it kind of lets you be introduced to it. At the same time, you can read the first book and set it down, and you've had a complete story, which is something I always like to recommend to people, is say, here, try this one book. You don't have to, you're not committed to, like, you can have a full story in this one book. It's also my least favorite Brandon Sanderson love story. I do not like this love story. It doesn't work for me.
Are there fans
very
out there?
Cliche. I think there are. I've heard somebody say that once, that they liked it. It's very tropey. It's like,
it's not his specialty.
No. And I like Warbreaker. Warbreaker is a good love story. This is not, but it's a great series. It was my introduction to Brandon Sanderson.
Yeah, me too.
You should read it because it's great.
Era, any thoughts on that pick?
I think that we would have been lynched if somebody didn't pick the Mistborn trilogy. So good pick.
Thank God for you, Red. Thank God.
Really good pick,
Red. Us all.
I would say this about I like Mistborn. I like the Mistborn trilogy. I would say it's one of those, to me, actually in some ways it reminded me of the Dresden Files in this way. The first book was good, not great. Right? It had a lot of exposition in it, and he deliberately wrote the book around these big set action pieces. It was good. Then book 2 was a little bit better. He kind of brought some more character development. It was a little bit too YA for my taste, but like it was, kind of there's this development, then you see things from other people's point of view, and it got better. And then Hero of Ages came along, and you could tell he's getting better in each and every book. And in Hero of Ages, kind of everything is able to come together, and he's able to tell a full and complete story by Hero of Ages. And to me, Hero of Ages is what sells the entire trilogy, at least to me. Those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I do agree on some points. I think it has the best ending of maybe any Sanderson. It really wraps everything together. I really like Kelsier as a fantasy protagonist. I'm not saying he's anything new, but I thought he wrote him really well, as on the surface level at least. And I think there's some stuff going on with him where he's a little more complicated than he seems on first read. The reason it didn't make my list, I can't stand the second book. I try to put some thought about rereadability into some of these trilogies, and all of them I would happily reread. On my list, I tried to reread Mistborn, knowing what happens, blew through the first book. I actually quite like the first Mistborn. I think it's really good as like an Ocean's 11, like they say, heist type of thing.
Exactly.
I think it's really just a fun fantasy book. The second book, I couldn't be bothered. I think it's massive. It feels massive. And like you said, depending on the love story, and just because I know what's coming too already, I'm like, the first read through, I want to see how it ends. But
the second book has some serious plotting issues, like it's uneven.
Pacing.
Yeah, pacing. Thank you. That was what I was looking for. I read it to get to the third book. I'm going to be honest.
Sure. Yeah.
And the third book has my favorite character development sequence in Spook. So that's probably a spoiler. Sorry, Kit.
What I would say is, look, if there's somebody that's new to fantasy that wanted to read a fantasy trilogy, I'd probably hand them the Mistborn trilogy. I mean,
sure.
The first book lays it right out for you. I mean, if you like fantasy at all, you're going to probably like the Mistborn, at least book one. I think for a first trilogy for somebody to read, you really probably can't do much better than that.
I brought this up in a previous pod, I think. I forget which episode we did. But I gave my brother, he was 20, 21 at the time, I said, all right, here's Mistborn and here's Name of the Wind. I was like, these are two fantastic fantasy books if you want to get into the genre, because he knew I read a lot. And he has since not finished Name of the Wind, and he's read like 70% of Brandon Sanderson's catalog.
I'm with him there.
So we're different types of readers.
No, it's...
I meant me and my brother. I do like Sanderson, though. I read most of his stuff, mostly Stormlight now, but
yeah, I think I've reread all of his books except for Rhythm of War.
Big books. All right, let's get this over with my next pick. So I chose the Thomas Covenant First Trilogy by Stephen R. Donaldson. This book, sorry, Red. Listen, I know this is a very divisive book. It's essentially about a guy who's a leper, and he's just probably one of the worst human beings I've ever read in fantasy. And he gets transported, or he's in a coma, or transported to a different world. So this is Portal Fantasy.
I was just going to say, is this Portal Fantasy?
And, I guess I would say the selling point for me with this series was the world building at first. Is the land that he's transported to. It's up there with, Middle Earth to me. And actually, when I read both books, Lord of the Rings and Thomas Covenant, I was way more enamored with the land. I think about it to this day. I haven't reread it in 10 years, though I want to. I just don't have the time. And the characters surrounding Thomas Covenant, probably the biggest anti-hero and biggest POS in fantasy, mainly Stoneheart, the giant foam follower.
Sawheart foam follower. Don't ruin his name.
Thank you. He deserves better. See, he's in my top 10 fantasy character list that I make up in my head. He's in there. He's had such an impact on me. But yeah, this book deals with change and not wanting to change, and kind of being self-pity and self-loathing. And I'm sure Red will tell you the one scene that really turns people off. And I don't blame people. I think it's worth to push through. I think these books are incredible despite that main character. But I totally I never push this series on people. I almost never do. I bring it up and I'm like, yeah, you might like it, but yeah.
Go ahead, Red.
I've read the first book. I did read the whole thing. In the first couple chapters, the first thing he does when he appears in this new world is brutally rape somebody. and he never once faces any repercussions. He's lauded as a hero for some bizarre reason, and he is terribly unlikable. And I cannot figure out why they decided to go with leprosy for a disease that he has. Like, that was just weird. And I'm like, I don't like you, so I'm not going to finish this series.
Yeah,
And I mean, doesn't he come back and, like, spoilers? Doesn't he leave and then come back and he meets his daughter or something from this? That's a product of this, right? Isn't that a thing?
Spoiler. Well, are we gonna spoiler this or not?
I just said spoilers. Didn't I say spoilers?
Yeah, you said. I'll be honest. I've read the first 2 trilogies. The second trilogy ended so well for me that I didn't feel I needed to read the last 4. I think it followed a different character anyway. And people said you're fine with that. They're like, yeah, it doesn't add much to the story anyway. But I get it. I mean, he does terrible things. And I think for me, it was kind of interesting how he dealt with just being, like you said, the amount of people that just showed him just 100% faith in him. And it was odd, but I have to say I haven't felt a series like this where I had to find out what happened at the end. I seriously just read a bit. I was like, I want to know what happens in general. And I feel like there's something to that, even despite that Thomas being such a garbage person.
Terrible person who I don't want to hang out with. Talk about a bad hang.
Yeah, he's top 3.
I read this book actually probably younger than I probably should have. I think the first book came out in 81. So I was maybe 12 or 13 when I first read it.
Oh, Jesus.
And it was my entryway into learning how to read books with characters I don't like. Like, how can I get through a story of an unlikable character? And this story is a story about duality. It is, you have on the one hand Thomas Covenant and his antithesis, the land, right? The land and the people in it are an antithesis to Thomas Covenant. There's a recurrent theme here of unearned grace over and over and over again in this book. Does Covenant deserve grace? I've never felt that, right? But that's not for me to decide, right? That was for the people of the lane to decide. Saltheart Foam Follower, probably one of the greatest heroes ever written. Lord Moram is criminally underrated as a hero, but that's because in the story they're side characters to this thoroughly unlikable person, Thomas Covenant. And if you can push through the unlikability of the protagonist itself and look at the deeper themes that are going on in the book and look at the characters around him and what they're trying to say, that's when the book really takes off. If you can't get through that part, then the books are not for you. And
I honestly think we're in the minority that can get through that book. But it's funny that those books were best-selling books at the time. And now they're kind of, I don't want to say lost to history, but when you're brought up as some of the best fantasy or more groundbreaking fantasy, these books aren't even sniffed at. And it was a best-selling series back when it was released.
And I don't want you guys to get the idea that I think that he's a bad author or like a...
No, I don't care.
That is not what I'm saying. He's talented, clearly. I just kept expecting something to happen to him, and nothing did.
There's good. Like, I was about to say, look, I'm not particularly religious, and I don't want to bring in religion too much, but there's a powerful theme of unearned grace, which is prevalent in some religions. Like, it doesn't matter what you've done in the past. You just have this state of unearned grace that you receive. And that is a theme throughout the book. And you can either accept it or not accept it. But that is ever present in the book.
Well,
I
it's interesting
with you because I belong to that religion. I disagree with you.
But there's been instances where, priests or families of people whose families have been murdered have found, forgiven them. And I've always been baffled by that. I thank God I don't have to relate to that situation, but I relate it to Thomas Covenant. There's somehow people find whatever strength it is to forgive these despicable people. And I think he touches on something like that in the book.
I get what you're saying. What I said, again, what didn't make sense to me is that they just revere him. It's so weird.
I think it's what Era said, that land, everyone in it is the total opposite of Thomas. And I think it messes with him, and it messes with me as a reader. Again, I'm not trying to sway you, Red. I get it.
We'll just...
I was about to say, Saltheart Foam Follower, like, it's funny, like, if you look at, I'll just give one small contrast. Saltheart Foam Follower goes through one of the worst things that somebody can go through. Any lesser being would have been broken. He almost did break, and he comes through like a hero. He does the exact opposite of what Covenant does, and he knows what Covenant did. He still forgives them. I mean, Saul Harfoam Follower is one of the greatest heroes to ever be written. That's all I can say,
I will end it to say that, though, on Reddit, if you ever go on the fantasy subreddit there and you just type in Thomas Covenant, there's just fantastic debate. It's just from Red's point of view, from Era's, and it's good, and it's mostly respectful, but I love divisive series like that where people really get into it, and that's definitely top of the list.
And I don't disagree with Red at all. Like if you can't get through Covenant, then
why
you can't
bother?
get through the protagonist. Yeah, don't even. I mean, I completely agree with Red on that.
I almost didn't get through. I was like, what is this book?
That's true. That's what I was thinking the whole time. Like, what is happening?
All right, Era, hit us with a fan favorite on the Discord.
My last pick, and I saved it for last because right now it's my favorite. That's the Broken Earth series by N.K. Jemisin. What can I say about one of the most celebrated trilogies of the 21st century? I'll say that I was hesitant to read this trilogy at first, because usually books that win all the awards turn out to be more of a critic's darling, experimental without telling a good story. I was wrong. I've debated saying this, but I think I'm going to go ahead and disclose it. This is very minor spoilers for the start of the story. At the start of the book, the character Essen is shattered by the death of her son. The way Jemisin described it is exactly how you feel when you lose a child. Exactly. It brought some old, ugly memories for me. It was devastating and it was honest. And that's what the series ended up being for me. Devastating and honest.
Oh, Era.
This book follows the story of the Origins, a group of people who have the power to control the Earth. The planet goes through a cycle of seasons with cataclysmic results to society. The seasons are massive, apocalyptic events that last for generations, reshaping the world and its inhabitants. Survivors scrape by living in calms that try to have humanity survive so that they can rebuild again. To help humanity survive is a group of people known as the Origins, individuals who have incredible power to control the Earth and can lessen the power of the seasons. Origins are found, taken, captured from their homes as children and are taught at Fulcrum under the supervision of guardians. The Origins are seen and treated as a useful resource or tool to help humanity survive. They're not treated as people. Their treatment is brutal. Normal people, or as they're called in the book, stills, target Origins out of fear, prejudice, and loathing. The trilogy is a tour de force. Jemisin has created a thoroughly realized world with unbelievably realistic characters. Her prose cuts through you like a knife. It shatters pretense. She uses fantasy to show the readers truths about the human condition. I've felt joy, anger, sadness, disgust, and the kind of heartache I've only ever felt in real life. You can just read the story and be completely satisfied. However, she absolutely meant it as a critique on the structures of power inequality in personal lives and in culture generally. It's also a critique of cultures throughout history built on inequality and the human condition generally. In 100 years, this trilogy will still be talked about and considered one of the great classics of American literature. And I have one quote, just one, that says the book for me. And this is from one of the protagonists. This is why she hates Alabaster. Not because he is more powerful, not even because he is crazy, but because he refuses to allow her any of the polite fictions and unspoken truths that have kept her comfortable and safe for years. And that's what this book does. I love this series. It breaks my heart every time, and I love it every time.
Wow.
Red? I've never read this series. I'm embarrassed.
I've only read the first book, and I read it, I want to say, in January last year. And then I had it on Libby, and it arrived mid-March, the second book did. And I was just like, I can't do this right now. I can't read this book because they are very, very dark. What I will say is that she's an absolutely brilliant writer. And I'm going to try again this summer because I do want to read the books, but it hit me at just not a great time in my life. And I was suddenly unemployed and we were all locked inside, and I decided to read Paladin of Souls again instead. But the first book is just great. It's a very interesting magic system. It's a soul crushing book. It really is. But it also has like interesting mysteries and stuff. There's like a weird thing with these obelisks in the sky and stuff. And I do want to go back into it.
I'll say this. There's one character in particular. His name is Shafa, the greatest villain written in modern fantasy literature. He is the great Satan. as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, this is one of those I've been wanting to read it, but I have to be in the mood. Not just because it's dark, but I feel like it's a series, from the sound of it, a series and writing that'll challenge me a little bit. I'm not going to be able to coast through reading it at night, kind of spacing out where I don't want to put down any series, but just a traditional, more standard fantasy. This one, I feel like I'm going to have to take it page by page, chapter by chapter, and really get something out of it. And, sometimes you got to be in the right space for that.
If you engage with the book at all, the way she writes, if you just want to read the story, you can just read the story. But if you want to engage with it at all, she's waiting there with open arms. The way she writes the book, I mean, it's like I said, it cuts right through all the BS. It really, really does. I mean, I was not expecting that first half of the book. And I don't want to say it destroyed me. It hit me really, really hard. It's really good. It's excellent.
I will ask real quick: is there? I thought I heard it. Does she write in second person? Because I'm not too well versed in that.
First, second, and third.
Wow.
Yeah, in all in the same book. Yeah.
I got to put them on big boy pants for that.
Yeah.
She actually said she just started writing that way without really a purpose, and then once she started it, she just didn't want to stop. She's so great at world building. I mean, it's just, I cannot say enough good things about her. She's just a wonderful author. She's great story. And remember what we talked about before? Sometimes you don't have you have a great idea, but not a good author, or a good author, but not a great story. It's a great story and a great author.
Well, between you and Red and Mistborn and Broken Earth, Discord will be happy. So thank you guys. All right, Red, what's your last one?
So I recommended Curse of Chalion on our recommendation episode. This is my favorite fantasy trilogy, excluding one particular fantasy trilogy.
Oh, of course.
Era, I have a question before I continue. If I mention what part of history the first book is, would that be a spoiler?
I don't think it is.
Okay.
I think giving the setting of the first book is, it's fine.
Okay. It takes place in before the marriage of Isabel and Ferdinand in Spain during the Reconquista. The first book, this man who was a galley slave is basically looking, he's lost his, I'm doing this very badly and it makes me sad. Anyway, he basically goes to his old patron's house and looks for a job and ends up being the tutor for Estelle, who is the daughter of the king who's dead, and there's a curse on the land. Really screwing this up, guys. Anyway, he basically was betrayed, and that's how he ended up in the galleys. Then he has to go to the capital, and he has to lift a curse because there's a curse on the royal family. There's lots of court intrigue, and there's mystery, and there's a very unique magic system where you are either demon possessed to perform magic or you're a saint. So those are the only two ways to do magic in the first two books. The second book takes place after this book, and the third book takes place like 800 years before the first book. And you can read them all differently, or you can read them all separately, but I would recommend reading them in chronological order because, like Mistborn, they focus on a different type of magic. So that's my pitch. And it's my favorite trilogy. And Paladin of Souls is my favorite book in that trilogy because it's about a woman whose the whole middle of her life was just a terror and a horror. And then she has to go out and rebuild herself. And it kind of feels like I kind of identify with that a little bit because the last 5 years of my life have been going through a divorce and taking care of my mom and then doing the estate thing. And
all the fun stuff in life.
All the fun stuff. I have my kids and I'm not cursed. I don't. Just feels that way sometimes.
It's funny. I've been recommended this book or the series more than any series, I think, in my life. And they said, you'd love it. They don't tell me anything about it. This was the first I've ever heard it. But if you ever, I think maybe the mass market paperbacks, maybe another cover, it looks like, I always thought it was a sci-fi. I'm like, what?
She does write sci-fi too.
Okay. But I feel the covers I've seen, it just doesn't look like a fantasy type of book to me. I was just like, is this sci-fi? Curse? And I'd never heard it. And the name sounds, or even her name sounds sci-fi. Bejeweled, I can't even say it. So I just always assumed it was a sci-fi until I heard you guys talking about it on the Discord and stuff. I'm like, oh, maybe I'll give it a chance. And
do you not do sci-fi?
I don't mind sci-fi. I'm never in a rush to read it. I mean, it just doesn't connect with me as much as fantasy does. And I definitely don't really read trilogies of sci-fi. Usually be one-off, kind of like my horror. I read one book, standalone books with sci-fi.
So you can read them as standalone. I wouldn't recommend it. She is such a brilliant author. Speaking of somebody who can cut you to your core, but she's also very funny. She's just got this clever prose that's just, I just love her.
I think I'd like that. I think I'd like those books because I like authors that implement humor in they're not humorous books, I would say, but they just have a good sense of humor and it shows in their writing. Like personally, the next person I'll bring up later. But I connect with those books more than say, Era Hitchhikers or Terry Pratchett, So, but I love books like that where you can just tell the authors are funny and it seeps into their writing. Not that Terry Pratchett's not funny, but I feel like they're humorous and satire.
I read Italian on Red's recommendation. This is the protagonist I was thinking of when you were talking about Divine Cities. Yeti, the main character, is middle-aged. He's brighter than he thinks he is, but he's not like the smartest guy in the room. He's not the strongest guy in the room. He's got a lot of things against him, but what he does have more than anybody else is experience. He uses it to his advantage. Very few action scenes because he doesn't feel the need to ever prove himself. And when he does need to act, he acts. He doesn't mess around. But mostly he's just a humorous kind of a guy trying to make it through life. Very, very engaging character. Really, really enjoyed him a lot. I've intended to get to Paladin of Souls, but I keep on getting sidetracked. I really don't have an excuse. I
you can
really,
put it on
really
your
like
bingo
the
card.
Yes. I need to do that. So
he has this great line where these young bravos are trying to get him to duel. And he says, "I don't duel, boy, I kill like a butcher."
Oh, yeah. Now we're talking. I love lines like that.
In fact, anyway, so this book, when I read it, I went and read a biography of Isabel immediately after reading the book.
Oh, well done. All right. I'll get to the last one. And Red is pumping her fist. Don't worry. Be assured. Both of you guys aren't fans. This is going to be fun. So I picked the first LotR trilogy by Joe Abercrombie. Again, it'd be no secret when I'm on the Discord. It's either in the Hob or Abercrombie channel. So I'm sure most people know of it. It's about three central characters, a snotty royal, a crippled torturer, and kind of nihilistic berserk, I don't know, not warrior, but
hillbilly
warrior. Yeah, savage. And for me, I just think where I said Hob writes the best relationships. I always felt Abercrombie writes the most distinct, colorful, creative characters in fantasy. I think Glocka and Logan are two of the best written characters in fantasy. I know Logan is hit or miss for some people, but Glocka, I've never, till this day, have read anyone like him inside his mind. Talk about anti-heroes. I don't know how, when people read this book, you come out rooting for him after maybe the first chapter or the first book, and it makes no sense. There's very little redeemable about him. And I think Abercrombie has such a way with those characters, and even just small characters that show up for a chapter and literally just a chapter because they die later. I mean, it's to get inside their head and become so, fulfilling, and you could see them as actual people in such a short amount of time, I think isn't just immaculate. I don't think, his world building leaves stuff to be desired. People rag that he's trying to switch up tropes too much or throw tropes on their head. I never bother with that. I think he does at the end. But I mean, if you love characters, and that's ultimately why I read fantasy or anything, it's the characters. Like Era said about Polanski, you could write about a phone book or about a fishing trip with your aunt. I don't care if it's Abercrombie writing it. I know there'll be colorful characters involved, and not to mention his action sequences. In this one, the duels he has between two characters, he's great at those moments where people love to say action is fantastic with Sanderson and Abercrombie. I like the moments before the fighting where you slowly start to smile because something the other character doesn't know, and you start to get goosebumps because something's about to happen. Those moments, bar none for me. So that's why he's on here, and that's why I think my girlfriend is jealous. I talk about him too much for someone she doesn't even know. Are you
cheating on your girlfriend with Abercrombie?
With a fantasy author, aren't we all?
I'll agree with you with Sandan Glocta. He is one of the more unique characters I've read. He really is. He's super engaging. I would recommend anybody to read the first LotR trilogy. It has all the elements that I would normally like in fantasy. I should like it. I don't. I don't really have a reason. Abercrombie's a great writer, but it felt, at least to me, the first LotR trilogy felt too much like anti-Lord of the Rings. I'm going to have an anti-Frodo. I'm going to have an anti-Gandalf. I'm going to have an anti-yada, yada, yada. I guess that's what turned me off, because other than that, I really don't have a good reason. I mean, it's everything you said.
He's stated multiple times that one of the biggest reasons he wrote this book is because he read Lord of the Rings and he loves Lord of the Rings. But he eventually kind of rolled his eyes at the ultimate good Aragorn, that the orcs were just ultimate evil people, kind of like George R. R. Martin kind of pivoted from reading that. And he didn't know fantasy could be different. And then when he read Game of Thrones, he's like, oh, people can be gray. They're not just black and white. Orcs just aren't evil, hobbits just aren't all good people. And so you're definitely on there. I mean, you hit it right on the nose. It's this trilogy is a direct response, even though he loves the Lord of the Rings. He's said it multiple times.
Well, not all the hobbits are good, because doesn't Bilbo's cousins or something steal his silver spoons?
I guess good in a sense where they're definitely on the good guy. Sorry. Yeah. I mean, hey, I hate people who steal silver spoons as much as the next guy.
I mean, Glokta is a very interesting character. I wanted to take a shower after reading First Law.
Me too.
It's icky. It's very, and I know that sounds shallow. I didn't dislike it the way I disliked the first Thomas Covenant book. I did read the whole trilogy, but it's just, I think it goes too far in the other direction of being anti-Lord of the Rings. Does that make sense?
Totally. I think,
and because the world isn't a hellscape. I mean, there's a lot of bad things in the world, but it's not. I just think it was like, okay, can we have some balance here? Everybody's terrible. Like, they're all terrible, terrible people.
I think there were good people, like Colonel West. I think the thing is that oh, that's true. That is true. All right, you're definitely right. Yeah. Well, I think it's great. I think that's his point, is that you come out of that book and it's like, oh, that's the good guy. He's done good things, but also he beat his sister. You know what I mean?
On the regular, it seemed like.
Yeah, he alluded to.
It's implied anyway.
Right. But as a reader, you're reading that book, you're like, this is a generally good guy. He steps up and leads the army. He's fighting for good. And there's just little thing, not that that's little, but in the grand scheme of the story, you know what I mean?
Well, and Glokta wants to take care of West's sister, and he's like really sweet to her. But
he also pulls people's toenails off,
and their teeth out. And
but I think there is something to say. I get it. It's relatively, I don't know, I guess bleak would be the word, but I think it's more pointless. Where you see where the characters end up at the end, it seems like the whole story was pointless because,
it's nihilistic is what it is.
And again, the topic of change, I think people ultimately want to change. In your heads, you're always like, I'm going to do this. I want to be a better person. And at the end of the day, I think his argument is people are who they are at the end of the day, and that's a big contrast to, someone's going to raise themselves and they're the better person at the end of the story. Frodo at the end he's a different person than when he started, or Aragorn, and he's going to show he's actually the leader that he should be, not Strider, where Abercrombie's like, you could put the good thoughts out there and say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to be a better man. But at the end of the day, you are who you are. And it's not easy to look in the mirror. And I get it. I wouldn't read this book during the start of pandemic. I'd put you that way.
Well, I finished it. I finished up the series, and then I started Broken Earth, and then the pandemic hit. So I I read First Law. And by the way, M.K. Jemisin is a much better writer than Abercrombie.
How dare you? I can't speak. I haven't read her book, so I won't.
I don't know. What do you think, Era?
I think it's my number one book, number one trilogy. Yeah, that's all I have to say.
I reserve judgment till I read her. I give her the benefit of the doubt.
So I feel bad. I should have read Broken Earth first, and then I.
No shame. I'm fine. I'll die on my hill with Jasna. He's even bigger than me. He'll go to war about Abercrombie. Yeah.
I think we all picked very fine trilogies. That's what I would say.
We did. Well, thank you guys for doing this. I want to thank Craig, for letting us do this, and he is our all father. Please go on Discord. It's a great community, and I'm not just saying that to butter it up. I've never been in a community like this where everyone's so nice, even when like tough stuff's brought up and disagreements. I've never seen the 99%, just the civility. It's very bizarre to me, but I love it. And on Reddit, patronage. How do you say that word?
Patreon, and thank you, Horizon Brave.
And thank you, Horizon Brave. Thank you. For Yettibeats, for Little Red Book, Era, see you later.
Bye.
Bye, guys.